14. And give you just kind of up to speed. If you remember, we talked about the spies that went into the land, and 12 of them came back and said, no, we can't go in there, we're going to die. And two of them, Caleb and Joshua, said, no, we can do this, God's on our side. But the people didn't listen to them. They're like, we're not going in there. And so because of their lack of faith, we see that, they're just already have showed that they're never going to do what God tells them to do, just constantly, going after their own hearts and their own desires. And so God's constantly punishing them, and He's upset with them. But chapter 14 and verse 27, the Lord said, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation which murmureth against me? And then He's saying that they're not going to go into the land now, except for Joshua and Caleb, and then like the future generation will go in there, but not these people that lived in that generation. Verse 29 says, your carcasses shall fall in the wilderness, and all that were numbered of you according to your whole number from 20 years old and upward, which ye have murmured against me. So He said, you're going to die in the wilderness. He doesn't tell them how they're going to die, but He says you're going to die in the wilderness. Well, when we kept reading the story, we see that, look at verse 40, they rose up early in the morning and got them up into the top of the mountain, saying, lo, we be here, and will go up into the place which the Lord hath promised, for we have sinned. So they're saying, like, oh, I know we messed up, and I know God said we can't go into the land, but, hey, we are bad, we messed up, and so we're going to go into the land now because we apologized. Moses says, wherefore now do ye transgress the commandment of the Lord? But it shall not prosper, go not up, for the Lord is not among you, that ye be not smitten before your enemy. And of course they go up, but then they are smitten of the enemy, just like God said. And so anyway, this is what's going on. This is where we are in the story. And then chapter 15, we're not going to look at that because it's a lot of little commands that Moses is giving to the people. God said, when you do go into the land, now not you guys, but when your future generations go in, these are going to be the laws that they're going to follow. And so we see a few of these laws. And then chapter 16. I want to give you all that backstory, so that some of these things will make sense as we go through the story. Why the people are where they are, why they're upset, why they don't like Moses. I mean, they've already not ever really followed Moses or the Lord very well, but here we're going to see a little bit more. Because of that story, now this is where they are. And what we see in chapter 16 is what we would call a coup attempt. Anybody familiar with that word, a coup? Like a military coup? I always read it and thought it said coup. But whenever I had a friend who was, he was from Africa and from the Gambia actually, and I remember talking to him and he said, and I said, man, I thought I was going to go to Gambia at that point of my life. And so I read all about Gambia and everything, and it was all old information. And I came back and said, I was reading about this and this and this. And he said, oh, I'm sorry to tell you, that guy's not the president anymore, and this isn't going on anymore, and this isn't going on anymore, because there was a military coup. And then I read back later on, then I kind of got up to speed and said, oh man, I'm way behind. And so there was this military coup. That's when I first started thinking about it. And how, if you think about it, every political setup all throughout the world, there's kind of like military coups. So we're not in our nation. Yeah, there are. It's just not really necessarily taking guns and going into the... although they want you to believe that people with guns and marched into the Capitol and were going to try to take over or something. That's not really how it happened. But a real military coup would work quite a bit differently than what happened on that day. But anyway, this is normal because people don't like leaders and people in position of authority. And so somebody eventually is going to rise up and say, you know what, I think we ought to take over, we can do a better job or something like that. Now, this is why, if you think about it, there's no such thing, there can never be like a true kind of democracy. There certainly couldn't be an anarchy that would work. There couldn't even really be, really if you think about almost anything where we're just granting everybody the liberty and all this, it's not going to work, because eventually somebody's going to rise to power with enough strength and enough wealth and resources that they're going to come in. And it might not play out like a dictatorship, but they're going to come in using whatever force and power they have to be able to control. So this is why you need strong leaders who can get in into a place of authority and have a strong backing and all that. But look, I'm not into politics and so what do I know? Okay, but here's what's going on. They're really not trying to overthrow Moses. I mean, they kind of are, but if you really check their hearts and try to figure out what's going on in the context of the story and all that, who are they really mad at? It's got to be God. Because all Moses is doing what God tells him to do and saying what God tells him to say. And so if they're mad at Moses, then they're actually mad at God. And isn't this really how it always takes place in the Bible? And it really in human nature, I mean, in our society now even, those people who are mad at Christians aren't mad at Christians, they're mad at God, or they're mad at the Bible, or they're mad at the things that Christians stand for. Oftentimes that's the case. Okay, so an example is, we won't have to go there because it'll take too long, but when later on the people, this is after some time goes by, and we go through the judges, and then we go, and Samuel's a prophet that's representing God. And the people say, hey, we want a king like the rest of the nations. Well, God tells Samuel, hey, don't worry. It's not you that they're rejecting. He said, it's me that they're rejecting. So give them what they want, and they end up getting a king. But ultimately, he's saying that who you're really rejecting is they're rejecting God. And God's not worried about that. He knows what he's dealing with. Well, later on, when Jesus comes, the Jews reject Jesus, and they reject then his followers, and start even persecuting his followers. And Jesus says, hey, don't worry about that. It's really me that they hate. It's not you that they hate. They can't hate you. They hate me, and then so you're just naturally going to get that and stick with it, stay firm, and be patient. All right, so it's always going to be the God who they're trying to resist. And I can make this about the Jews and say, yeah, those Jews, they never obeyed God, and they did this and they did that. But the Bible says that the things that happen in the Old Testament are for our examples. Okay, so we're supposed to always try to read that in mind to say, like, how can I apply this to me? How can I apply this to our church? How can I apply this to our whatever, our family or something like that? There's always an application that can be made. And so I'm going to try to do that in this message. But we're going to go through chapter 16 here and look at the story as it presents itself. Now, this comes up again later on. I've preached, this year recently, I preached on, it came back up again about these different types of false prophets. And the Bible says, like, there's the Cain type of false prophet, there's the Balaam type of false prophet, and then there was the Korah type of false prophet. Well, this is the story of that type of a leader and false prophet that is talking about. Okay, so let's start with the first couple verses. Numbers chapter 16. Now Korah, the son of Ishar, the son of Kohath, the son of Levi, and Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, and On, the son of Pelath, sons of Reuben, took men. All right, so now we got Korah, and then he's got 3 men that he brought with him, and these guys conspired together. It seems like obviously Korah was the one who initiated it all, and he got these influential men, and then it says that they rose up before, verse 2, rose up before Moses with certain of the children of Israel, 250 princes of the assembly, famous in the congregation, men of renown. All right, so obviously, if somebody's going to try to form some type of a coup or some overthrow or whatever, what are they going to do? They're going to try to bring some power behind that, and they're going to get some people on their side. And so what you often have, because there's always power in numbers, right? So what you'll have sometimes whenever somebody will come to a pastor, and I've seen this in the ministry, and a lot of pastors have told me the same thing, and I've seen it myself. A lot of times when somebody has something that they want, or something that they want to, a change that they want to see happen, or something like that, they'll come to the pastor and they'll say, look, I've been talking to people, and a lot of people are saying, right? Because there's power in numbers. They want you to believe that, like, all these people are telling me this, right? And oftentimes it's not. Oftentimes it's just that one guy, or maybe when that guy says lots of people have been telling me, what he really means is my wife's been telling me, right? And so this is how it's going, right? But it sounds better when you say lots of people are telling me this, and so we need a change. And so they come to him with that mentality. This is very common. This is very, this is how it goes because someone's not happy with something, and so they want to see something different. So this is what they're presenting. But notice that not only did this one guy get 3 other guys, but it says they got 250 of the princes, meaning just the principal people, the leaders of their tribes and stuff. So imagine 250 people. It's not like they just one day said, you know what, I'm kind of tired of this. Let's go gather up 250 people and go. No, it probably took some time of planning, some time of kind of like rubbing elbows with people and getting to know them and winning them over, getting them on their side, and then slowly turning them against Moses and Aaron. And you know what I mean? It's just talking about that. Like, I don't like how this goes. What do you think about this? And eventually, hey, now this guy's on my team. So, hey, let's go get some more people. And eventually they wound up getting 250 people plus Korah and these 3 other guys. Okay, so now they bring this kind of grievance to Moses. Okay, here is, not necessarily stating demands. I guess that's usually how it goes, but kind of just challenging him and telling him what they have a problem with. Okay, so look at verse 3. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron, and said unto them, Ye take too much upon you, seeing all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Wherefore then lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. Okay, so you see the motive right here, a little bit about the motive of the heart and what's going on. But when they come to Moses and Aaron, there's obviously people holding grudges. There's obviously people that are mad about certain things. But the grievance, they said, is number 1, you take too much upon you. Now, what they mean by that is you have too much authority. You give yourself all the better positions. You give your family the better things. And think about it, the Levi, so the Levites were the ones who were like the ministers. They were the ones that were in charge of doing all the ministerial type work, okay? Now, Levi was the father of Moses and Aaron, okay? So all Aaron's sons now are going to be like the main priests, okay? And Eleazar, is going to head up all the, I'll read some of this here in a minute, but he's going to head up all the, taking care of the holy office and doing the censers and stuff like that. And then other sons of Levi are going to have certain roles to take as well. For instance, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself because we're gonna look at this in a minute. But for instance, Korah and his family, they had certain responsibilities that they were supposed to do in the ministry as well. Okay, so they're coming to him and they're saying, look, all of us are holy. All of us speak on behalf of God, and all of us are God's children, and all of us are important. Why do you think that you should have this position? Why do you think that you should be able to do that? And little does he know, I've mentioned this almost every message. Remember how the story started? Moses didn't want to go do this. Moses didn't want it, and he's asked several times to stop doing that. In fact, one time God gives him 70 other prophets because he says, look, I can't do it anymore, I'm done. And he doesn't want to do this. And I always remember this story when I think about Korah or anybody in this situation. I always think of the story about when I was working on the bus route. And let me just tell you, when I went to Bible college, they said, here's different ministries you can be involved in. And as part of your going through Bible college, you have to be part of like 3 different ministries or something like that. So sign up for these different ministries. The last ministry I wanted to do at that time in my life was work with children. I just did it. It wasn't what I wanted to do. And so God worked on my heart, and through a process, I eventually said, all right, you know what, I'm going to go help out in the children's ministry. I'll work on the bus route. They had a need at that time for people to work in the bus route. Long story short, I went there, and the guy said, hey, man, why don't you come work on our bus route? Hey, we really need help. And next thing you know, he said, hey, can you be the captain of this route? I'm leaving. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to get stuck being the captain of this bus route. I really don't want to do that. And I'm like, I don't think I'm your man. And he's like, no, I really need help. And then the leaders, the assistant pastor came, and he talked to me and said, hey, so-and-so recommended you and all that. So I said, I'll do it temporarily until you find somebody else. Anytime you say that, you're pretty much, you remember like Brother Rob, right? I'll take the song leading for a little while. I think he was a song leader for 20 years. Right? So he just wanted to be a help and to step up and help, and then he just kind of got stuck in that position. But this is what I said when I was in the bus ministry. And then all of a sudden, I'm the captain, and they had a captain and a driver. They didn't want you to be both. Okay, you had a captain, and then the driver, all he did is drive. He took people there, and he didn't have to focus on making sure kids are behaving or anything, because he could just focus on driving, okay? Well, the bus driver that I had ended up, like, just over some time, just giving me all kinds of grief, and just like, he just always bitter towards me, and all these things, and every time I threw out an idea out there, he tore it down, and so like, I would ask to do something, he'd want to do something completely different, and I'm like, what is the deal with this guy? And later on, I found out, here's all it was. I was this new guy who was just thrown into this position, and nobody ever asked him. He was the bus driver. Maybe he wanted to be the captain. And so he wanted to be the captain, and so he was mad that I was the captain. And I was like, look, buddy, I would love for you to be the captain. I don't want to be the captain. But it's kind of like a little, doesn't it sound real childish? But this is human nature, and those childish things, they stick with us our whole life. We just kind of start dealing with it in slightly different ways. But it all came down to he was mad because he didn't have the position. I'm like, I didn't ask for this position. I didn't want this position. But this is kind of how Moses was. And all of a sudden, this guy's saying, look, Moses, you're just taking too much upon yourself. He's like, what? And so what do they do? I love what Moses does in this next verse. He falls on his face. Look at verse 4. And when Moses heard it, he fell on his face. This was in humility, like, oh God, help me, tell me what to do. And some time obviously goes by between 4 and 5, and then God tells Moses what he's going to do. And he spake unto Korah and unto all his company, saying, even tomorrow the Lord will show who are his, and who is holy, and will cause him to come near unto him. Even him whom he hath chosen will he cause to come near unto him. And then he says, this do, take you censers, Korah, and all the company, and put fire therein, and put incense in them before the Lord tomorrow. And it shall be that the man whom the Lord doth choose, he shall be holy. Ye take too much upon you, ye sons of Levi. I love how he turns that upon him. He's like, you think that hey, you're just holy as anybody else, and so therefore I should be able to do whatever I want to do. He's like, here's what God said. I'll show you who's holy and who's not holy. Tomorrow, go ahead and let Korah and his crew take up the censers. Now, the reason that this is important, go back to chapter 4, Numbers chapter 4. You got to see this to kind of understand what's going on in the story. Chapter 4, and the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, take the sum of the sons of Kohath from among the sons of Levi, after their families, by the house of their father, from 30 years old and upward, even until 50 years old, all that enter into the host to do the work of the tabernacle of the congregation. This shall be the service of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of the congregation about the most holy things. Okay, now, back in 16, verse 1, it says, now Korah, the sons of Ishar, the son of Kohath. Okay, so this is another generation, but he's a Kohathite. Korah is a Kohathite. And here's what it says. Back to chapter 4. This shall be the service of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of the congregation about the most holy thing. Verse 5. And when the camp setteth forward, Aaron shall come and his sons, and they shall take down the covering veil, and cover the ark of the testimony with it, and shall put thereon the covering of badger skins, and shall spread over it a cloth wholly of blue, and shall put it in the staves thereof, and upon the table of showbread they shall spread a cloth of blue, and put thereon the dishes, and the spoons, and the bowls, and the covers, to cover withal, and the continual bread shall be thereon, and they shall spread upon them a cloth of the scarlet, and cover the same with the covering of the badger skin. These are all the responsibilities that the Kohathites have. And shall put the staves thereupon, and they shall take a cloth of blue and cover the candlestick of the light and his lamps and his tongs and his snuff dishes and all the oil vessels thereof wherewith they minister unto it. And they shall put it and all the vessels thereof within the covering of badger skins, and shall put it upon a bar, and upon a golden altar they shall spread a cloth of blue and cover it with cover of badger skins, and they shall put staves thereof. And they shall take all the instruments of the ministry wherewith they minister in the sanctuary, and put them in a cloth of blue, and cover them with covering of badger skins, and shall put them on the bar. And they shall take away the ashes from the altar, and spread the purple cloth thereon. And they shall put upon it in the vessel thereof wherewith they minister about it, even the censers, the flesh hooks, the shovels, and the basins, all the vessels of the altar. And they shall spread upon a covering of badger skins, and put the staves around. Now, you haven't figured out what's going on yet. So all the things that they set up in the tabernacle, you remember whenever the pillar of cloud or the pillar of fire by night, whenever it began to move, the people said, "Oh, time to pack up camp and move on and follow the Lord." Okay, so the Kohathites' job was going to be to cover all of these holy instruments and cover all of these vessels and all of these things. They covered them with badger skins, and they covered all that. And then those heavy things would have staves on them so that they could walk. Several of them will carry them on their shoulders, and several of them can carry like the Ark of the Covenant and all that kind of stuff as they're hiking down to the next camp. Covering everything up and packing it away and taking care of it, making sure it gets to the next location properly. Now let's see, where did I leave off? Chapter 4, verse, let's go ahead and go to 15. And when Aaron and his sons have made an end of the covering of the sanctuary, and all the vessels of the sanctuary as the camp is to set forward, after that the sons of Kohath shall come to bear it, but they shall not touch any holy thing lest they die. These things are the burden of the sons of Kohath in the tabernacle of the congregation. And to the office of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, pertaineth the oil for the light, and the sweet incense, and the daily meat offering, and the anointing oil, and the oversight of all the tabernacle, and of all that therein is in the sanctuary and the vessels. So you see, the Kohathites, they had that job of packing everything up, getting rid of the ashes, cleaning things up, and then carrying these instruments to the next campsite. And once it's all set up and everything else, then the sons of Eleazar, they were able to come in, and then they would put the oil in there, and they would lay out the offerings and the sacrifices, and they would do all those holy things. Whereas the Kohathites, they weren't allowed to touch those censers. The censers is where they burned incense. They weren't allowed to touch those because those were holy things. And any time in the Bible, after God told them how to set all these things up in the tabernacle or whatever, anytime somebody who wasn't given that job would touch one of those holy things, they would die. And so here, Korah and all these men are saying, you take too much upon yourself. And so you understand what he's saying is okay, here's what God said. Tomorrow, we'll let you touch the holy things. You know the things that God said don't touch or else you're going to die? We'll let you touch the holy things. And if you die, you know you weren't holy. All right? They're like, okay, let's do it. Not smart. They should have humbled themselves and said, you know what? Maybe God called these guys to that office for a reason. And maybe he wants me to do this other job for a reason. Not because they're not capable, maybe not because they didn't have the right skill level, or they weren't, but they just weren't qualified. They didn't meet God's specific, even in this case, nothing that was out of their control. They're just simply born into this family, so therefore it was their job. Okay, and that was the case for them. So back to chapter 16. So let's look at what is going on here and how this is going to apply to us. Okay. So number one, they weren't content with the position God had given them. Okay, let's go back to number 16 and we'll pick up at verse 8. And Moses said unto Korah, Hear I pray you, ye sons of Levi. Seemeth it but a small thing unto you that God of Israel has separated you from the congregation of Israel to bring you near to himself, to be the service of the tabernacle of the Lord, and to stand before the congregation and minister unto them? And he hath brought thee near to him, and all thy brethren, the sons of Levi, with thee, and seek ye the priesthood also? For which cause both thou and all thy company are gathered together against the Lord. And what is Aaron that ye murmured against him? Right? So he's saying, look, you're going against what God said. And you might be taking it out on Aaron. You might be taking it out on me, Moses. He's saying, but look, you're really going against the Lord. And what it actually came down to is he's saying, look, you're not happy with the position God's given you, which, by the way, is a full-time office serving the Lord. You know, so it'd almost be like an assistant pastor or a deacon or something like that, being like, hey, we're not happy with this job. What, do you want to be the pastor? Most pastors will tell you, hey, go for it. Give it a shot for a little while. You know what I mean? Let's switch places for a little bit and see how you handle things. I mean, most pastors would be kind of like that. Now, I'm just making reference to pastors. You could apply this in many ways. Maybe you're the boss. Maybe you have to work for a boss and you're like, I'm so much smarter than this guy. I'm so much better qualified for this job. I'm better looking than this guy. I mean, whatever the case. And I mean, look, everyone has that. Everyone's been in that job. And maybe you yourself at your job has been like, why is that guy even the boss? I can do so much better than him. You know? Hey, but control your tongue if you start feeling that way. Control your actions if you start feeling that way. Because it could be that you don't really want that job after all. I remember at UPS, I thought I was big stuff when they promoted me to supervisor. Then I realized, you probably don't want to be a supervisor. Just stay hourly and just work hard, mind your own business, and get the work done. Once I became a supervisor, it was a whole other world. And we were dealing with the Teamsters, the union, and stuff like that. And it was just like, you can have it. I want to go back to hourly. It was rough, okay? But he's not trying to reason with these guys because they're acting. He's saying, like, be content with the job God gave you. It's a great job. You get to serve the Lord. You get to be in the tabernacle. You get to do all these things for the Lord. And he takes care of you, you know, and all. But anyway, because the way it worked was these guys actually, it was like full-time job. Like, churches aren't directly linked to the priesthood in the Old Testament. Okay, so I'm not making a complete comparison. But in a manner of speaking, here's how it worked. You had 12 tribes, right? 12 tribes of Israel. And all of them brought their tithes and their offerings. Okay? And then what happened is, because they didn't, you know, have all the resources and all these things for themselves, and most of this was just set up for like when they get into the land, but they haven't done all of this yet because they're wandering in the wilderness. But the idea is that then those 11 tribes, you know, they would be contributing through the tithes and offerings, and then that last tribe, the tribe of Levi, would live off of that money that came in that would be divided among themselves. It would take care of the church, the tabernacle and all those things, and it would do all that, and it would provide these guys to be able to do their full-time job right there. But guess what? They didn't own any land. They didn't have all these other luxuries and benefits that these guys might have. They're kind of like left with the hand-me-downs, and they're left with we'll take care of you, but your job's in the church and all that kind of stuff. But still, these guys are saying, hey, you know, why are you taking so much upon yourself? We're holy too. And he's like, yeah, that's right. That's why you have this job. You know, that's why God's called you out and he's given you this job. But you just don't like your job. You want to have this job too. And so he's saying, here's what God said. Go ahead and give it a shot. Try these sensors out. Touch the thing that you're not supposed to touch and see what happens. Then we see also that they, and by the way, here's something that the Bible teaches. Matthew 25:23. You don't have to go there because I'm running out of time, but this is the story of the talents. And in the end of that parable, he says, those who are faithful over little will be given much. Okay, and so the idea is, you know, maybe you take a job or something like that, and you're just like, I just don't like this silly job. Like, I really want to do something greater or whatever. Like, you know, humble yourself and do the best you can at that little job, and you're probably more likely later on to get a better job or a higher paying job or whatever it is you're looking for. And guess what? If you took care and did a good job at the little things, that's going to make it a lot easier to do the big things whenever they come because you've already got experience, you've already practiced, and you know what I mean? So be faithful and work hard at those little things and just trust the Lord, or in this case, trust your boss or whatever the application is you're making. Well, it's ultimately trusting the Lord no matter what you're doing, but just trust that if you work hard and you're faithful to the job you're given to do, then the Lord will take care of that. And any promotion or thing you're looking for could come in the future. All right, so number 2, so they weren't content with the position God had given them. Number 2, they weren't happy with the job Moses was doing. All right? Look at verse 12. And Moses sent to call Dathan and Abiram, the sons of Eliab, which said, we will not come up. Because he says, go up and do this. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And here's what he says. Is it a small thing that thou hast brought us up out of the land that floweth with milk and honey, to kill us in the wilderness, except thou make thyself altogether a prince over us? What's he saying? How did he bring us out of the land of milk and honey? They're talking about Egypt. They were supposed to go out of Egypt and go into the land flowing with milk and honey. And they're like, you took us out of the land of milk and honey, and you're supposed to take us into the other place, which was the land of milk and honey. You're supposed to take us over there, and now we're not even going in there. Because God told them, no, you're going to die out in the wilderness. He said, now, you took us out here to die, Moses. Which is funny because it really wasn't Moses that did that. It was their own fear and saying we're not going to go in that land. The giants over there and all these things. And so they're like, we can't do that. We're going to die over there. And so now they're like, okay, you're just going to die in the wilderness then. They're like, what, did you take us out here, Moses, just so that we could die? They're never content. They're never happy with what Moses does. And all Moses is trying to do is just hold on for dear life and just follow the Lord and do what the Lord's told him to do. And they have this attitude, and this is what I titled the message, but it really does, I had to squeeze it in here a little bit, but they have this attitude, not my president. You remember when Trump, but really, let's face it, everyone does that with every president. If you didn't want that guy, whenever he gets in, he's not my president, right? He is your president, whether you like it or not, okay? Now, look, as Christians, we obey God rather than man. And so we're not really worried about who the president is in a manner of speaking. God's the king. But as American citizen, and abiding by and operating by the laws of the land, so to speak, there does come a point where you're like, you know what? We have just going to have to submit to some degree to what the authorities tell us to do, up until the point where they're asking us to disobey God, of course. But we have to just submit to that, and rather than having that attitude, well, there's no my president, and just constantly just fighting everything and raising, protest and doing all this kind of stuff, that's not really the Christian attitude that we're supposed to have. The thing is, if you go back, you don't have to go there, but in Exodus 3, when God tells Moses, remember the burning bush and all that, God tells Moses that he's going to lead the people out of Egypt. You know what he says? He says, for I have heard their crying. I have heard their cry and their suffering. And here now they're saying, you took us out of the land of milk and honey. Now look, Egypt was a prosperous nation. It was a great land. But they were there as slaves, and they were treated poorly, and they were crying and crying out to God, and they were suffering, and the people were too harsh on them and all this stuff, and they weren't allowed to worship their God, which was the reason they were supposed to be leaving. And so they went to leave, and they still weren't happy. They got to the promised land. Now we can't do that. Still weren't happy. Now they're in the wilderness. God said, you know what, you're just going to die in the wilderness. Still not happy. They're never happy, okay? So they weren't happy. They weren't content with the position God gave them. They weren't happy with the job that Moses was doing, which he was just trying to follow the Lord. It might have looked like he was doing a poor job, but it was kind of because of the people that he was dealing with. Number 3, they weren't accepting of the punishment that they had received. Look at verse 14. Moreover, they just got done saying, you brought us out here to die. You're not a prince over us. Moreover, thou hast not brought us into the land that floweth with milk and honey, like they took us out of the land of milk and honey, and you haven't taken us into the land of milk and honey, or given us the inheritance of fields, of vineyards. Wilt thou put out the eyes of these men? We will not come up. It's funny they said you haven't given us vineyards, because you remember the guys walking by with a cluster of grapes so big they had to put it on staves and they had to carry it over. They had opportunity to go into the land and they would have had all the luxuries and all the, it would have been like the Garden of Eden. But they feared and they didn't want to go up in God's strength. And so now they're just taking it out on Moses, who they don't think is going to do anything to them. But verse 15, Moses was very wroth and said unto the Lord, respect not thou their offering. I have not taken one ass from them, neither have I hurt one of them. And Moses said unto Korah, be thou and all thy company before the Lord, thou and they, and Aaron tomorrow. And take every man his censer, and put incense in them, and bring ye therefore, before the Lord, every man his censer, 250 censers, and also thou also and Aaron, each of you his censer. And they took every man his censer, and put fire in them, and laid incense thereon, and stood in the door of the tabernacle of the congregation with Moses and Aaron. And Korah gathered all the congregation against them unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And the glory of the Lord appeared unto all the congregation. And the Lord spake unto Moses and unto Aaron, saying, separate yourselves from among this congregation, that I may consume them in a moment. Saying, you know what? I'm going to spare you guys, but you better get out of the way, because I'm not going to be merciful on these guys. And they fell upon their faces and said, O God, the God of the spirits of all flesh, shall one man sin, and wilt thou be wroth with the congregation? But once again, you got them just begging for mercy on these guys. God, I know they're stupid. I know they don't like us. I know they're going against us, but will you just spare them? Like, this is what tells me, like, this is the leader that they actually want. This is the leader that they actually need. They don't want that guy, but that's who they need. The guy that's going to stand before God and on their face and God spare these people. I know they don't deserve a chance, and they kind of want to wash their hands of them, but please, God, spare them. But anyway, he already said they're going to die in the wilderness, and they decide how they're going to die in the wilderness, by the way, if you read the story. The Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto the congregation, saying, get you up from about your tabernacle of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Moses rose up and went into Dothan and Abiram, and the elders of Israel followed him. And he spake unto the congregation, saying, depart, I pray you, from the tents of these wicked men, and touch nothing of theirs, lest ye be consumed in all their sins. So they gat up from the tabernacle of Korah, Dathan and Abiram, on every side. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the door of the tents, and their wives and their sons and their little children. And Moses said, hereby ye shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works, for I have not done them of my own mind. If these men die the common death of all men, or if they be visited after the visitation of all men, then the Lord hath not sent me. But if the Lord make a new thing, and the earth open her mouth, and swallow them up with all that appertain unto them, and they go down quick into the pit, then ye shall understand that these men have provoked the Lord. And it came to pass, as he made the end of speaking all these words, that the ground clave asunder, and that was under them, and the earth opened up her mouth and swallowed them up, and their houses, and all the men that appertained unto Korah, and all their goods. They and all that appertained to them went down alive into the pit, and the earth closed upon them, and they perished from among the congregation. You talk about a sinkhole. From time to time you hear about these sinkholes where the ground just, God opened the ground up. I don't know if it was like quicksand or whatever. There's some kind of legend. I never believe all those traditions, but that says it was like a funnel and everything just kind of went down. All the houses and all that just kind of went down. Whatever it looked like. Can you just imagine being there and just knowing I don't know, it wasn't all like on television and publicized, but I'm assuming everybody in the congregation kind of knew what was going on, and there was this big challenge, and here these guys were offering the censers and all this stuff. And the ground just opens up, swallows them, their houses, their children, their family. I mean, say what you want about that. This is God's punishment. And because of their choice, you say, well, why would God kill the innocent children? God didn't kill them, they killed them by disobeying God. And remember that when we sin against God, our family is going to be affected by that. You say, well, God wouldn't do that. Yeah, he will. Or he's not doing it, you're doing it. He'll allow it to happen. And so we want to be real careful that we don't do that. But here, all these men now died. Ground opened them up, swallowed them in. I mean, can you imagine being the neighbors? All right? What are we going to do now? Now, let me ask you this. Do you think that the children of Israel, after seeing this happen, and seeing the rebellion, and seeing the people that stood up against Moses and Aaron, and stood up against God, and they saw the ground open up and swallow them straight down into the pit, which is hell, do you think that they said, you know what, I think we better get right with God now, and obey Moses and Aaron and what they say that God said? Nope, they don't. Look at the next verse, verse 34. And all Israel that were round about them fled at the cry of them, for they said, lest the earth swallow us up also. And there came out fire from God and consumed the 250 men that offered incense. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Eleazar. Okay, notice this. I thought I was farther than I was, but notice now he said, okay, now Eleazar, speak unto him that they take up the incense out of the burning and scatter upon the fire thereon, for they are hollow. Those are the people that they were supposed to be dealing with those things, not Korah and the Kohathites. So let's skip down real quick to let me see, verse 34. Well, we already passed that. Where was I going here? Let's see. Look at verse 42, sorry. 42. And it came to pass, when the congregation was gathered against Moses and against Aaron, that they looked toward the tabernacle of the congregation, and behold, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. And Moses and Aaron came before the tabernacle of the congregation, and the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, get you up from among this I'm sorry, I skipped too much. 41, thank you. I always do that. But on the morrow, all the congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, saying, ye have killed the people of the Lord. Wait a minute. God did that. You killed the people of the Lord. It's like, forget. Right? So God just proved who the people of the Lord were. Who the people that he had called to that position were. And these other people that challenged him, he proved that they weren't holy. They weren't the people that were supposed to do that. And then all the bystanders are like, you just killed the people of the Lord. It's like, you wicked people. And it's like, don't you see that God's the one in charge? And we just need to submit ourselves and humble ourselves and obey God. But we always want to fight. We always want what we want. We always want something different. And then what ends up happening is that we pay for it, our family pays for it. And so the rest of the story, there's a plague, and more people die. And Moses and Aaron, again, stand between the dead and the living, and they call out to God, and the plague is finally stayed. And so hundreds and hundreds of people end up dying. Some are swallowed up into the ground. Some are consumed by fire. Some are given over to these plagues, and they all die in the wilderness, just like God said they're going to. So, every time Moses intercedes for him a little bit, he's like, all right, I'll spare them. But their behavior is going to end up getting them killed one way or another, I guarantee. And so, there are sometimes people are just so hard-headed, they won't listen, they won't obey God, and it's like, well, you're lost. You're the one that's going to pay for that in the end. We don't ever want to be like that. We don't ever want to be like Korah or all these people that, Korah got riled up against the man of God. We don't want to be like all the Israelites who don't get the message, they don't get the picture. We want to give the Lord his space to do what he wants to do and subscribe to his will, and everything's going to end up being better in the future. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for your word and for this great illustration and truth in the Bible. I pray you help us to adhere to it, realize that it's an example for all of us, and that we can apply it to ourselves. Humble us, Lord, that we might serve you better. In Jesus' name. Amen. Let's go.